I'm joined today by Dr. Stephen Buser, who's a clinical psychiatrist, also a former major in the United States Air Force. He's an editor, along with Leonard Cruz, who's been a guest on the program, of A Clear and Present Danger, Narcissism in the Era of President Trump. So let's start, if we can, with the recent assessment that was done of Donald Trump, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, done as part of what was really a physical exam by the White House doctor Ronnie Jackson. From a medical perspective, how valuable is that 30-point assessment in figuring out whether a patient might be experiencing some of the early signs of cognitive decline?
For cognitive decline, it's a good test, but only in the more severe, cases. A lot of people have been looking since that, report at the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. And when you look at it, it's a very basic exam. You need to name three animals: a rhinoceros, a camel, and a lion. You need to do very simple arithmetic. You need to draw the face of a clock. So it's really not, high level evaluation. Now, it is good if somebody had severe dementia, if somebody had clinically severe Alzheimer's disease. Those things can be difficult, to do. But it's really not a good test of really the cognitive abilities you need to be in the presidency.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw that you get 6 out of 30 points, you get 20% for just telling the interviewer the date and city where the exam is being conducted. That strikes me as testing for something far more advanced than what is even being sort of hypothesized about Donald Trump. Is that right?
Right. It's not bad as a kindergarten entrance exam. If you want to see if your child was ready for kindergarten, it would be good for that. Or if you had a severe question of Alzheimer's disease. But again, the complexities of running the government, that is by far not a suitable test. The other concern is Trump himself supposedly asked for the exam. And that's highly unusual. As a clinician, we're always suspect if a patient asks for a specific test, because there's no way to know that patient didn't prep or prepare for that test.
Can you talk to us a little bit more about what would be a more accurate way of testing for what it is that is sort of concerning about Trump's behavior?
Right. There have been a number of concerns around President Trump really since the beginning of the election process back in 2016. One concern was narcissism. We put out a book, Clear and Present Danger, Narcissism in the Era of President Trump, where we looked at narcissistic elements within it. And there's been a lot written, a lot spoken of, since then. There's further concerns of emotional stability. I wrote a piece in the New York Times about, would he be safe, with the nuclear reliability criterion. And then there's the third piece, which you've alluded to today, which is cognitive abilities. When you look at a 71-year-old gentleman, the oldest person to enter his first term in the presidency, who has unusual judgments, who has declining vocabulary with an over-reliance on superlatives, that has difficulty completing a thought, there are increasing concerns that somebody like that may indeed have a cognitive impairment. The only good way to assess that would be a full neuropsychological evaluation, which is 3 to 8 hours in duration. It's not a 10-minute quick can you name an animal test, but it's an in-depth psychological test done by a neuropsychologist that could really root out early cognitive impairments. Nobody is saying that he's got severe dementia at this point, but what many are concerned of, does he have early cognitive impairment for somebody who's in their 70s?
We now know that at some point during his presidency, Ronald Reagan was already experiencing some cognitive decline as a result of Alzheimer's. Is your sense that even Reagan at that time would have passed the Montreal Cognitive Assessment?
Most likely. Of course, it's impossible to answer that because, as far as I know, he didn't have the test. But correct, at the point where Ronald Reagan was in office and there were people with concerns, it would have been quite easy to pass the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, I suspect. That's a guess, of course, but that is not a difficult test to pass.
So I know that there will be people who watch this interview, listen to this interview, doctor, and they will say, wait, hold on a second. What happened to this principle of never evaluating or even approximating possible diagnoses for someone that a psychiatrist has not examined directly and in person? Isn't that what Dr. Buser is doing? He's using media clips and appearances of Donald Trump to hypothesize about what may be going on cognitively, and that is something that the medical community looks down upon. Can you talk a little bit about that and how those sort of standards have shifted over time with regard to certain types of conditions?
You're quite right. There's certainly a debate, particularly in the American Psychiatric Association, on whether it's reasonable to diagnose a public figure from afar. And that's known as the Barry-Goldwater rule, going back to the 1964 election between LBJ and Barry Goldwater. And it's been widely accepted, mostly that psychiatrists and psychologists shouldn't formally diagnose a politician or anybody in the public eye based solely on observed criterion. And in our book, we actually talk a lot about that. We have an entire chapter on the Goldwater rule, and we actually agree mostly with the Goldwater rule. And I've been very careful, both in my writing and in my public appearances, to not diagnose Donald Trump with anything. Now, that doesn't mean we can't be concerned with what we see. That doesn't mean we can't raise alarms, and it doesn't mean we can't urge further evaluation. So while I can't and won't formally diagnose President Trump with narcissistic personality disorder, with emotional instability, with a cognitive decline or impairment, I can certainly say I've seen evidence of symptoms that any reasonable person would want further evaluation. Remember, this is the man who, as president, should he wake up tomorrow morning and decide he wants to launch a nuclear attack, those nuclear missiles are in the air in 5 minutes, and those missiles cannot be recalled, they cannot be aborted, they will strike their target. That could lead to a full-scale nuclear exchange, which really could end civilization as we know it on the planet. So do you want somebody that we're concerned about that could destroy the planet in 5 minutes' time, that you feel comfortable ignoring an evaluation, not getting further information? Why would we not at least want that evaluation to be an option to protect the safety of the American people?
Yeah, I mean, I would say on the basis of identifying a giraffe and a tiger, I would say I don't want him having the button. If he could have identified like a capybara in that exam, you might be able to convince me otherwise.
It'd be much more depth test.
Let's talk about the nuclear weapon aspect of it. What specifically about all the different behaviors makes you most concerned when it comes to that example that you've mentioned twice now, the nuclear launch capability that Trump has as president?
Exactly. The nuclear concern has been one of my stronger concerns more recently. While we spoke a lot about narcissism early on in the campaign, my bigger concern currently is about nuclear accessibility. I served 12 years in the Air Force, and as a psychiatrist, one of my roles was to evaluate military personnel to see if they were fit for duty. And if they were working with nuclear material, the criterion for fitness for duty was that much stronger. Department of Defense Regulation 5210.42 lays it out. It says only those personnel with the highest degree of reliability, trustworthiness, conduct, and behavior shall be allowed to work in the vicinity of nuclear weapons. That got me thinking, suppose President Trump were instead Airman Trump, and suppose Airman Trump was stationed at the base I was at, and suppose I had a clear outside evidence that Airman Trump was engaged in sexually abusive behavior towards women, that he was cyberbullying on Twitter, that he was prone to erratic emotional states, that he was paranoid at times about being surveilled or persecuted unjustly, and that he had times of making highly distorted, if not frankly untruthful comments. Would I be willing to certify Airman Trump as nuclear ready under the criterion? My answer was immediately no, absolutely not without further psychological evaluation. Something like that, we would have done much more testing to see would they be safe around nuclear weapons. So that's the great irony then, that the entire nuclear chain of command, from the airman in the missile silo to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, are all held to this very high degree of psychological stability and readiness, except one person, and that's the President of the United States, the very person who has his finger on the nuclear button.
There's actually other examples of that as well. I mean, we talked about with these Access Hollywood, grab them by the you-know-what tapes, how the other person on those tapes, the host of the program, Billy Bush, he lost his job, and Trump went on to become president of the United States. The theme of the different standards seems to be a more and more common one, doesn't it?
It does. It really does. And that gets to what can we do about this? Yeah, if the stakes are really that high, if the world could be plunged into nuclear war in 5 minutes with catastrophic consequences, why do we have the whole chain of command under tight scrutiny except the one person, the President of the United States? There are actually a number of initiatives in Congress as we speak to help this, to add to the safety and security of the American people. One is House Bill 669 with the Senate Bill 200 version that's sponsored by Representative Liu and Senator Markey. That's the Restriction for the First Use of Nuclear Weapons Act of 2017, which basically states that no president will have the authority to launch a first strike nuclear attack without the consent of Congress. Now, if there's a retaliation needed, if somebody attacks us, we can instantly attack back. But were that to be put into law, no president would be allowed to initiate an attack. And when you think of it, why do we need to destroy the planet in 5 minutes when we could just as easily destroy the planet in 3 to 4 days deliberation, or perhaps get a different solution over those days?
I'd like to talk a little bit about narcissistic personality disorder. My dad, who's also a psychiatrist but was trained in Argentina, sort of half-jokingly once said to me, narcissistic personality disorder is what we developed to be able to assign a diagnosis to people who are just flat out insufferable. And of course, he was half kidding when he said that. But my question is, when it comes to the fitness to serve as president, narcissistic personality disorder is not in the same league as some form of cognitive decline or dementia, right? We're talking about two different things.
Well, indeed, depending how we define it, there's narcissistic traits, there's narcissistic personality style, and there's narcissistic personality disorder. Those are in a spectrum of severity, and it's really hard to determine, which of those may be going on, again, without, further evaluation. Cognitive deterioration, though, is so much more clear and dangerous and verifiable on testing. Not that narcissism isn't, but if somebody has early cognitive impairments, that will likely progress and is highly dangerous in this kind of condition. So I think we're talking about a whole different concern at that level.
Last thing I want to touch on, did you see that very bizarre video of Trump like he had a huge wad of chewing gum in his mouth when he was giving a speech and then signing an executive order that's been the subject of lots of speculation in terms of loose dentures or whatever else? Are you familiar with that video?
There are so many videos, it's actually hard to say because I've seen President Trump in numerous cases. But yes, I do believe I know the one you're referring to with that.
Yeah, so we were ultimately told that that was the result of dry mouth due to a medication that the president was taking. There was speculation about loose dentures, but really rich people tend to have dental implants, not dentures. And in any case, we were told after the medical exam, Trump doesn't have dentures. Does that entire incident feel okay to you now in terms of we've gotten a satisfactory explanation, or is it still a suspect incident in your mind?
Well, it's certainly not okay, particularly in the broader context. If that was really the only event that we were concerned about, then maybe it could be explained away with that. But if you spend 5 minutes on Google and just type in unusual behavior by President Trump on YouTube, you will find enormous amounts of material out there, all on video, all captured. This is a man who really struggles to complete a sentence. His sentences are long, they're run on, they're repetitive. He uses these superlatives in a almost nauseating fashion. You really get the sense that something just isn't quite right. And a MoCA, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, is not reassuring. That does not give us significant information. The only thing that would reassure me would be a nonpartisan. It would have to be somebody who didn't have a political slant, and maybe multiple evaluators, but a nonpartisan neuropsychological, in-depth, many hours evaluation. That's the only thing that would satisfy me at this point to really be reassured that the American people are in safe hands with this president.
We've been speaking to Dr. Stephen Buser. He's a clinical psychiatrist, former major in the United States Air Force, and he also edited with Leonard Cruz the book A Clear and Present Danger, Narcissism in the Era of President Trump. Thanks so much for sharing your insights today.
Thank you so much, David. Really appreciate it.